Now, the last thing we did in the previous video was create a macro to filter by major. Let's invoke that now. It was Control-Shift-B to filter the business majors, and that gives me a list of all the business majors. And I could easily create macros for other majors, but it's probably not very practical. If I've got 20, 30, 40 different majors, I'd have to assign each one to a shortcut key. Or alternatively, I could create a button, which we'll talk about later. But there's a much better way to do something like that. And we're going to turn the filter off here. And the thing we need to do is we need to customize the macro. And that involves a little bit of simple programming in a programming language called Visual Basic. But what we're going to do here is relatively simple, and it's pretty straightforward. And what we want to do is go to our Developer tab and click on Macros, and it'll come up with a list of macros that I've created here. And I've got BUAD majors and Career New. And BUAD majors is the one that I want to edit, so I can click on Edit. And it opens up a new window here that I'm going to maximize that shows me the macros I've created so far. So here's my Career New macro. And lines that begin with an apostrophe here are not actually commands that are part of the macro. Those are comments, and the text for a comment always appears in green. And it has the name of the macro that I typed in, it has the description that I typed in when I created it, and it has the keyboard shortcut. And these are all comments that are here for a person to read rather than for the computer to read. So if somebody goes in to look at these macros, those comments help them figure out what the macro does. Now let's take a look at the BUAD majors macro, which is really short. It's only 3 lines long. Remember, the first command was a go-to command that said go to column A, row 3. Well, column A is column 1. That's what the C1 here is for. And R3 means row 3, and that's what the R3 here is for. And the next thing I did was, once I got the cursor in the data like that, the next thing I did was go to the Data tab and click on the Auto Filter button. And this says apply the auto filter, basically turn auto filter on for the data selection, which is the data that I'm in. So it'll select all of the data for all the students. And then the last command was to do the filter. We clicked on the down arrow next to the major column and said give us the BUAD majors. Well, this command here says select everything from A2 to F45, which is all of our data, and auto filter it. And when you do an auto filter, you have to know which field or which column it is that we're doing, and it's column 3 of the selected data, column C. And then you have to specify what the filter criteria is, and the criteria in this case is to select the BUAD majors. Now I could change this to anything I wanted to. I could go in here and I could change this to math majors. And if I ran this macro right now, it would give me the math majors. As a matter of fact, I think I can do that. If I click on this button right here, let's try that again. I need to be up here, I think. And if I click on it to run it, and I minimize this window and go back here and look, it just ran the macro, and now what I have are the math majors. Okay, I'm going to clear this filter here, and I'm going to flip back over here. I just did an Alt-Tab to flip back over to my macro. Now, obviously, it doesn't make much sense to go in here and edit your macro every time. The whole point of doing a macro is to automate stuff. So this doesn't really make any sense. But what we can do here is something that really is useful. We can ask the user at this point in the macro which major they want. And if we do that, then in effect we've created a macro that works for all majors. The user doesn't have to turn on filtering or put the cursor in the right place or know anything about auto filtering. All they have to do is know how to invoke the macro, which is Control-Shift-B, and it doesn't like it that I moved off of that line, but Control-Shift-B to invoke the macro. And then when it gets to this point, we need to tell Excel to go out and ask the user to input the name of the major. And the way you ask the user for stuff is by throwing up what's called an input box. And there's no space in here. So this is a command in Visual Basic. It's actually called a function in Visual Basic. And we put up a prompt and we say which major do you want? And this is the syntax for an input box function. You say, you give the name of the function, input box. Capitalization doesn't matter, but if I move off of this line, the Visual Basic interpreter here will capitalize the I and the B for me. And then a parenthesis, and this is a function. You already know how to do functions in Excel. They always have an argument list inside of parentheses. And the argument list that we have this time is the text. You've got to put quotation marks in here, which make up the prompt. So an input box, which you've seen millions of times in Windows, will be thrown up on the screen. The question, which major do you want, will appear, and a little box will appear so that they can type it in. And they respond, and whatever they type in will basically replace what is here in the macro. The macro will get invoked, and you'll see what you want. So let's go ahead and save this, and I'm going to close out of here because we don't need to do this anymore. And I'm going to, I do need to make sure that the filters are turned off, because the macro that I've got depends on them being off in order for it to work correctly. So now I've got them turned off. I'm going to click over here. I'm going to do a Control-Shift-B. It moves the cursor into the data, it turns filtering on, and then it invokes the filter command, and it gets to the input box and says, which major do you want? And this time I'm going to type in math, and it's not case sensitive. I can type it uppercase or lowercase or any combination. Click on OK, and there I've got my math majors, and that's how you can customize a macro in Visual Basic and get input from the user. And we'll stop right there for this video.